Highty! Welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing part 1 of the books that surprised me. I've decided to split this into 2 sections, one for books that surprised me in a negative way, and one for books that surprised me in a positive way. So for today, we're going to do part 1, which is the books that surprised me in a negative way. This is not to be confused with a worst of list. These are not necessarily the worst books that I've ever read. They're just books that didn't quite match the expectations I had when going into them. And this list is actually quite long, so I'm going to keep it quite brief and just talk about the main details, or the main points, about each book that I bring up here. I'm not going to go too much into the nitty-gritty, otherwise this is going to be a very long video. This is also in no particular order, so I'm just going to pull these out. Some of them I have physically, some I don't, so let's just get started. The first one on this list actually might be quite controversial, and that is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. Oh, I still have my receipt marking where I was in this book. Also, this is beat up, isn't it? Usually I'm very careful with my books. Wow, you've been through the ringer, sorry about that. But this book is one that I've been wanting to get into for a really long time. I've tried to pick it up twice. I've made it to around the same exact point each time I've picked it up, and I've DNF'd it. I don't think that I've DNF'd this for good. When I first picked this up, I was very, very new to sci-fi, and I do think that it's a good book for sci-fi beginners, or at least I've heard that that's the case. But every time I picked it up, I just wasn't in the right mindset for it. The little details that are included, the little sci-fi details in the beginning, instead of being into it and intrigued by it, which I know I can be based on sci-fi reads that I've had, I was just skimming over them. So I think every time I picked this up, it was a me problem, not necessarily a this book problem. So I do plan to give this one another try, but this has just disappointed me every time I've picked it up. I can't really put my finger on what it is, but it never seems to be able to grab my attention. I have heard the audiobook for this is supposed to really slap though, so maybe I'll give that avenue a try. The next book is much more recent, so I think I've mentioned this on my channel a couple times, but that would be These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I was so excited for this book. I expected to really love it, but it couldn't grab my attention, similar to Red Rising. I don't think it was necessarily a bad book, but I could not stay focused on what was in front of me. I kept thinking about other things I needed to do, and for the life of me, I just couldn't get through it. So I was just extremely bored. So I ended up putting this down and DNFing, and I don't think I'm going to pick this one back up. The next one I've mentioned a couple times on my channel here and there, but I think that this is kind of a shots fired one, and that is The Raven Boys. So I forced myself to finish the first book of this series a couple years ago because of the hype around it on BookTube, and I had FOMO, right? I wanted to know what I was missing, but I don't get it. This is one book that would belong on the worst of list for me personally because nothing about this series is interesting. The characters are meh, the mythology seems like it was pulled out of absolutely nowhere. Our antagonist, at least in the first book, which is the only one I've completed, I wasn't invested in this person at all. They were just kind of, again, like the mythology, like plucked out of thin air, like, oh, we need an antagonist for these characters now. I don't get it. I don't understand the vibes. I'm really happy for those of you who do. I tried to read The Dream Thieves, and I DNF'd it at like page 5 or 10 because I was like, why am I doing this to myself? So this series in general just really disappointed me because I went in riding the hype. This next one was a huge surprise for me, and that was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Now, this is the only book I've read by Baldwin, so I'm not like canceling him out as an author at all. I'd like to give his other works a try. I think part of this was me being at fault because I didn't do research as to what Giovanni's Room, like what the vibes of it were. I knew that it was about a gay man in Paris and like his life there, and more of a character study than anything else. So I was prepared for that, but I wasn't prepared for the doom and gloom and just horrific, sad feeling of this book, and it depressed me for days. So in that case, maybe the book did what it wanted to do. Maybe that was the goal. But for me, it didn't meet my expectations that I had for the book going into it. So again, this is a case where the book is not bad. The writing was very beautiful at points, although it did hit on a pet peeve of mine, which is where characters meet eyes, and then in this instant, they understand everything about the other character, and there's like a 3-page summary of that character's life that was surmised from this one glance. Like, that's a trope, or I don't know if that's a trope, but that's a writing device that I really don't enjoy, and this book did employ that quite a bit. So not that that's necessarily bad writing, but it's writing that doesn't work for me. So yeah, this book just didn't work for me as a reader, but I would be open to other James Baldwin books for sure. The next one I have here is Red Sister by Mark Lawrence. This was a series that was so very hyped. I went into it like riding the hype even higher than the Raven Boys, because this sounds like everything I'm gonna love. A grimdark fantasy world, assassin nuns, a school setting. Could it be more perfect? And while I did not dislike this book, it didn't match my expectations. I went in with a 5-star prediction. And I think I ended up giving this one a 4-star, and then the second book and the third book, I think the second book was a 3.5 and the third book was a 3, so they consistently went down for me. But this particular book, I've talked about it on my channel before, but my issues were based around the way that the characters connected to each other. The world was fascinating, the school setting was really good, and the characters individually were well developed, but the relationship between the young female girls in this book was not well written. You can really tell Mark Lawrence has never been a young girl, because that's not how it works.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Enemies aren't made that way either. And unfortunately, those bases of those relationships that are supposed to be well established here are the bases for plot points later that made them completely unbelievable and didn't work for me, thus the decreasing stars. Again, like I said though, I don't hate this book, and the fight scenes, I've talked about this a couple times on my channel as well, but the fight scenes in this series are top tier. You will not find better. They are so good. I actually had to stop sometimes and just bask in the glory of what I just imagined in my head. Like, this needs an adaptation, and it needs it so badly, because I do think that really good actors could get rid of my issue of relationships between characters and kind of those dynamics, and between, you know, villains, and having like a really well portrayed villain could be, you know, fixed in an adaptation. So this is one that I think would do really well on the screen, but as a book, it just didn't meet the expectations that I had for it. The next book on this list is Steel Crow Saga. Now, unfortunately, in this case, both the work and the author have fallen short. Putting that aside though, the work itself was marketed as like a Pokemon meets, like, I think, was it Avatar that was quoted? I feel like it was. Yeah, Avatar and Pokemon, which, like, Avatar I love to this day, Pokemon my childhood, bring it on, right? And it's supposed to be like spiritual animal-like companions. It just fell flat on all fronts. The fighting wasn't good. I remember specifically there was this one character who was supposed to be extremely intelligent, and they just told us over and over again how intelligent she was, even other characters in the book, but she never proved it. In fact, she's outsmarted, outwitted so many times in the book that I'm just like, you're telling me something and showing me something completely different. And I just didn't, the world building wasn't good enough, like it didn't let me sink into the world. It all felt very surface level. So yeah, this book was just a really big disappointment. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars, but upon reflection, I definitely should drop this down. I need to go back into my Goodreads and change some of my ratings, a lot of my ratings, because I think I've been a little too kind in recent years. I've been giving people a little bit too much benefit of the doubt. So if you see all my Goodreads like ratings changing, just look away. Don't worry about it. You can ignore me. This next one is Difficult Women by Roxane Gay. Now this one hurt. This was a really big surprise for me because I loved Not That Bad by this same author. And so I was very excited going into this one, expected to love it. It's supposed to be a collection of short stories telling the stories of women who don't meet the moral standards we tend to have for women, and they're not really upset that they don't meet that in a lot of cases. And so I was just really interested to read about all of these women and their lives. But I don't really remember, it was a while ago that I read it, so it's hard for me to remember exactly. But there was something about this book that just rubbed me the wrong way. The way the stories were told, I still felt like the women were being moralized, like on the same spectrum that we were trying to avoid. And they were being deemed lesser than on that scale, and yet that's okay. But I thought that this book was going to be breaking that moral standard, so there were just a lot of themes that didn't come through, didn't work. And it's okay to have unlikable characters. This book is supposed to be about that, but I remember viscerally hating some of the characters in this book, which maybe is the point, I'm not sure, but it wasn't enjoyable for me to read about it. I think I ended up giving this one about 2 stars maybe. Yeah, just wasn't a good reading experience. Next, we have These 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This book was hyped to the fucking heavens. I think it was maybe 2 years ago when it came out, and I was getting into thrillers. I was ready. I love intricate plot twists. Bring it on. And so essentially this book follows a main character who you don't know the actual identity of the main character, but this main character wakes up in different bodies of different people every day and has to solve a murder mystery that happened in this house within a particular time frame. Or it resets, this character doesn't remember anything that they've learned or gained in that time and have to start all over again, waking up in those different bodies. And the premise sounds amazing, and I will admit that the plot twist at the end of this book was incredible. I loved it. It blew my mind. However, the process of getting there was painful. Part of this could be my fault because I listened to it via audiobook, and maybe it would have been better as a physical read, but I couldn't follow the storyline for the fucking life of me. I didn't know what narrative voice we were dealing with, and we would jump, timelines, and it didn't seem to have any kind of streamlined aspect to it at all. And I'm okay with dual timelines and jumping around, but this one just seemed poorly done. And I just kind of took it for granted, like, okay, we've figured this out now. I don't really know how we figured it out because I couldn't follow, but now we've gotten this piece of information. And that was how I ended up following the story, which for me is not that enjoyable. I like to know the little nitty-gritties. Nitty-gritties? The little nitty-gritty ways that we get to those conclusions. So yeah, it just disappointed me. I don't know if I gave this a 2 or a 3 star. A 2.5 sounds about right for me because, like I said, the ending, the plot twist was amazing. I just really didn't enjoy getting there. Now this next one I have definitely mentioned on my channel kind of near the beginning when I first started, and that is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. Now I still own this book because it's stunning. I love the aesthetic of this book, but this was not at all what I expected. I think part of the issue this time was marketing. So this book was marketed as a feminist retelling of the story of Achilles. We were supposed to see the perspective of all the women who take place in that story, who are a part of that story, but they don't really have a voice and we just see them in the background. And this was supposed to emphasize that as it was marketed. However, half of this book is from Achilles' perspective, which I was so confused because why do I need this? There's so many stories about Achilles' perspective. Like, that's not why I picked this book up. I don't really need to read about that. And then when we did get the female perspectives, it seemed like we didn't get them interacting with each other at all, even though there were points where they could have been interacting with each other. And then when they did, it was very, I don't know how to put it. It might have been correct. It may have been historically correct for the time, but the way that there was like this kind of catty, like I hate you vibes between all these different characters, we didn't get a character build up to those feelings between those characters. So when it came up, it just seemed really surface level and like, oh, all women hate each other is like the vibe that I got from it. So I think that this could have been done really, really well. Not all women have to be likable. They can hate each other. Actually, I love when women have, legitimate issues with each other. I love seeing that in books. But this this book didn't do the work needed to make that believable or enjoyable. So yeah, I think I ended up giving this 2 stars. I think, like I said, part of it is marketing, but the other part just, it just didn't do what I was told it was setting out to do. So maybe I just misunderstood what the goal of this book was, but it didn't match what I had in mind for it. Okay. This next one, this is one that could go on the worst books for me, I think, and that is A Study in Charlotte. I don't know why I still have this, honestly. I should give this away to a charity or to my library here in Japan for someone else to read, because I really don't like this book. A lot of the reasons that I don't like this book is because, again, say it with me, it didn't meet the expectations I had going into it, which is the theme of this video, right? That they were disappointing for me. And I love Sherlock Holmes. I love the dynamic between Holmes and Watson. I'm a huge fan of all of that, those works. And so I was so excited to see a gender-bent version of that in the modern world. Like, yes, bring it on. But this had the nuance that's supposed to exist was nowhere to be found. Like, I mean, the nuance when it comes to the relationship between Watson and Holmes. So I did like that the main character here kept kind of the assholey aspect of Holmes, because like Charlotte had that, because Holmes is that. Sherlock Holmes is an asshole at times. But it's all about the way that Watson handles Holmes and is able to deal with him in a way that other people can't. And the way that, in turn, Sherlock will do things that he would not do for anyone else because of the way Watson gets him. And it's a very delicate dynamic, and that was just steamrolled over completely here. The Watson in this book just apologizes profusely to Charlotte whenever anything happens. Even though she was the one in the wrong and the one being an asshole, he just apologizes profusely. And that's just his personality, essentially. And she deigns to forgive him. So that was one part of it. And then also the mystery aspect, I couldn't have cared less. I really didn't like this book. Maybe this belongs on a worst disappointing books. But it was disappointing because I was so excited to see a gender-bent version of something that I really adore and really enjoy. So yeah, nah. This was not it for me. This next one, I don't think I've talked about maybe on my channel except for the wrap-up in which I read it, but that was My Sister, the Serial Killer. I was so intrigued by this book. This is when I was on my big thriller binge and really getting into the genre. And I just love the idea of someone who knows their sister is a serial killer. Like, what would you do with that? Would you turn them in? Would you help them? Just such an amazing idea for a book, and plays with a lot of, moral ideas. And I don't know, I was very excited to pick this up. I was loving what I was hearing about it. But when I actually read it, I knew it was short, so I didn't expect something super in-depth, but everything felt surface level. And when the author had a chance to really dig their nails in and dig deep into an issue or a moral issue or have the reader think about something, it wasn't really done. It seemed just kind of like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then we were finished. So yeah, it didn't have the kind of nitty-gritty aspect to it that I was really looking for when I picked this up. This is another one, though, where I'd say it's not objectively a bad book at all. I just think that the writing style and what I wanted from the book didn't quite match what it actually is. Okay, so this one is actually going to be 110% shots fired, but that is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. So this is one of those books, this is one of those books that I definitely rated way too kindly and way too high when I first read it. I think I gave most of them 4 stars. The second book is still 4 stars in my memory. I really did enjoy the second book because I felt like that book really expanded the world and dealt with a lot of the characters that I enjoy. But this first book and the last book, I really don't like them that much. V.E. Schwab is one of those authors where I love the idea of her premises and they sound so fascinating and interesting, but she never pulls them off satisfactorily to me. The execution of those premises is never something that I want. That's not the right word. It's never what I think it has the potential to be. That's what I'm trying to say. And that was the case with this series. The series ending, was not a fan. The last book is my least favorite book. And I could see, like, I could glimpse what was possible with this idea in this world. And I do think that that was explored the closest in the second book. But the first book and the third book just... It's not for me. The next one I definitely don't have to talk a lot about because you've seen it on most of my recent videos, like end of the year wrap-ups and things like that, but that is Redemptor by Jordan Ifueko. So this book, I had the highest of the highest of the highest hopes for this book because I adore Raybearer, which you can see behind me here. I adore that book with all of me, and I was really looking forward to this one, but I go much more into detail in recent videos, so I'll be sure to link them up above and down below. But just in summary, all of the intricate like character work and world building and all of the uniqueness of the magic system that I loved in the first book were missing or lackluster here. The other thing too is that the story in this book, the storyline, like the plot holes, the number... They weren't plot holes, they were plot chasms. They were plot voids that just, I could not unsee them once I saw them. And the plot was also just racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And while fast-paced books aren't necessarily bad, one of the joys of Raybearer was that we knew, or Ifueko knew, when to stop and take a second and sit in that moment and then move on. We didn't sit in any moment here, except for ones that were completely unnecessary to sit in. And it was information that we as readers already had and didn't need to take time to explore more. So yeah, this was just really, really disappointing for me. Broke my heart a little bit, but at least it's pretty. So that's nice. We're getting near the end of this video, guys, I promise. Apparently I've got a lot of feelings about books that surprised me negatively. But the next one is going to be The Bird Eater. Now, this was an audiobook that I picked up on a whim. I wanted to try to get more into horror, and I am very much a little bitch, a little baby when it comes to ghosts. So I wanted to kind of try to dip my toe into that type of horror and see how that works. The answer is that it does not work. Because this book is not necessarily highly praised. In some places it is. It has like a medium rating. But this book, the first like 5% terrified me. And I was like, this is not gonna work. Like, this is too much horror. This is too close to home. So basically this is a story about a haunted house with a little boy who likes to kill people. And it was creepy, and it hit all my soft spots in a bad way. And I was like, turning this off now. So it surprised me with just how much it affected me and proved to me how much of a little bitch I really am. So will I ever actually be able to get into this genre of horror? Not really sure that that's ever going to happen, but maybe I'll try to dip my toes in again in the near future. This next one is also one I've touched on my channel, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'll link up above and down below videos where I go into detail about it, but that is The Kingdom of Liars by Nick Martell. This was a book that I picked up, one, for the beautiful cover, and two, I saw some people that I trusted really enjoyed this book, but I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about it, so I wanted to give it a shot. Basically, the premise of this book sounds amazing, but the main character is absolutely insufferable to me and ruined, like reading from his perspective, ruined my entire experience of this world. And I also feel like some things that were really emphasized in the summary of this book, like the high-cost magic system, and the idea of prophecies being given by pieces of the moon that fall from the sky, those two things were really emphasized, and like we barely explored those at all. Just tiny, like surface level, and those were things that really, really pulled me in and I wanted to know more about. So this book didn't work for me, but I do know quite a few people that this worked for and have read the second book and enjoyed that as well. So I do think that this is one that just didn't match for me specifically. We've only got 3 more, so let's do this. The next one is The Gilded Wolves by Roshni Chachki. Now, this book was, again, I think part of it was the marketing, but like if anything is a heist, they say it's like Six of Crows. Well, in this case, I don't think the marketing was horrible in that it is like a found family group of young people brought together to do a heist. They really got to stop making that comparison, because for many people, like myself included, who love that series so much, it really isn't fair to the book that you pick up to immediately be comparing it to that. So I think part of it was marketing, but also I think this just read too young for me. I've talked about a little bit here and there how I think YA and I've aged out of it. It's not really a surprise. I'm not really a young adult anymore. There are some that can surprise me, and I don't think I'm blocking it off of my reading at all. I'm not like sticking my nose up at it, but this was one of the first books that I read that read really young to me. And I had a moment where I was like, God, I don't think I can connect to teenagers anymore. Like, I think I'm at that age where I'm like, the youth just don't, I can't connect with the youth anymore. Like, that's how I felt during part of this. And there were also sections of this where parts of the heist were so easy, where I was like, guys, come on. You're supposed to be so super smart and like elite, and come on, guys. If I can figure it out, all right? So yeah, I think I was just disappointed by most aspects of this book. I was also really excited for the relationship aspect, because it's supposed to be kind of like, I don't know, mysterious, like push and pull kind of thing. But that was also a letdown for me. So I'm definitely going to be not keeping this book, but I think that there is someone who will really, really enjoy this. It's just not for me. Now, these last two might be the most controversial of the lot, so get ready to clutch your pearls, hold on to your horses, but the next one is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Guys, I wanted to love this. I was so hyped for this. I bought this right when it came out because it was timed with a time that I returned home to the States, and I ran to the bookstore to pick this up because I was so ready for it. But it was kind of before a lot of people had read it, so I didn't really hear feedback that the beginning of the book and the end of the book are two very different vibes, two very different stories. And so that was very, very jarring for me during my reading experience. I don't mind like war being horrible and an interruption into life, because that's what it is, but it just wasn't an enjoyable reading experience to me to kind of jump between those two like writing styles so quickly. I also really enjoyed Rin as a character in general, but when she started to delve into the magical part of this book, which has to do with like shamanism and things, the magic system just didn't work for me. I don't really know how to explain it now because it's been a while since I read it, but I remember being able to articulate this better when I first read it. But I wanted to kind of delve into this idea of the gods and know a little bit more about their story and understand a little more about that so that I could understand how that translated to people who, are able to be shamans. But I didn't get any of that. They were just kind of these mysterious beings that existed on a different plane, and that was that, I appreciate this book for what it's done, taking like real world, historical events and putting them in a fantasy setting so people can, learn more about that without having to like read historical accounts and stuff. I really appreciate the book for what it's done there. And like I said, I did like Rin, the main character. Right, I forget his name, but the main male character who's supposed to be like this fighting machine, like the strongest guy, hated him. I don't remember his name for the life of me. But yeah, every time he was on the page, I was like, why is this person here? Yeah, I didn't like his relationship with Rin either at all. I'm not saying like romantic relationship, no spoilers here or anything, but did not like the way they interacted, so. This book just didn't work for me, I'm sorry. Maybe one day I'll give it another shot, maybe. Okay, my camera's dying, can we do it, maybe not. Okay, the last one is The Sword of Kaigen. This book, the fighting scenes are amazing. A lot of the things you hear people say about the character work, the fighting scenes, those do pay off. And this book did make me cry, and it did get me very emotionally invested. However, the second half of the book, while slowing down the pace and having like the peak in the middle, is not a plot device that I hate. I didn't like the way that it was done here, and there was a particular character arc that this character's the same way, same way, same way, same way, same way. And like 90% into the book, they do like this complete 180 and they're like, oh, I'm kumbaya, wonderful now. And I was like, that's not how that would work. So that really bothered me. And then also as someone who is, you know, learning Japanese, I live in Japan, I speak it quite well. There were parts of the language inclusion here that did not make sense, and parts of Japanese that were used a little bit incorrectly. And this is not going to bother anyone reading this book that isn't like really into the Japanese language specifically. So don't let that put you off from this book. But for me personally as a reader, that was something that annoyed me and pulled me out of the story every time that happened. Like, our characters have been speaking English to each other. You don't really need to insert Japanese here because we've all assumed they've been speaking Japanese thus far. Just let that continue. So the kind of the random switching there really didn't work for me, but I don't think it'll be an issue for most readers. Okay, my camera really is about to die, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'd love to have you as part of this community, and I appreciate it. Let me know in the comments down below if you have same thoughts, different thoughts, might start some drama. Let's do it. Let's chat. But for now, I'm gonna head out. じゃあね!